To go from, I think you said one of, 5 or 6 African Americans in a 800-person school to your senior year graduating as class president. How did you find that path and what enabled that journey?
I will actually share one story. There was a young man who was Caucasian who I was really good friends with, and I was really good in math at the time. And so I was tutoring him because he needed help. And this was all done by phone, right? And one day his father realized who I was and who he was talking to, like about his math homework and math tutoring, and went to him and said, it's great that you're getting tutored because you need the help, but could you possibly find somebody who's not black and find one of the white kids in your school who can help you with this? And the kid was such a good kid that he ended up sharing the story with me. That's really like the only instance I can think of where things just got uncomfortable or weird. And maybe it was stranger than I remember, but as I look back, I cannot say that it was uncomfortable or an uncomfortable place to be for 3 years. I really enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed going to a small high school. And I credit my ability to engage with anyone now comfortably to that experience. I had to figure out a way to get along with people and fit in.
Good morning, Yolanda.
Good morning, Charles.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Yolanda Jackson. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel of the Bar Association of San Francisco and its Justice and Diversity Center.
And Yolanda, would you mind describing what it is that you focus on in that role and how you found your experience at BASF so far?
Okay. It's really like running a business. Most people don't realize that when they hear of nonprofits. The Bar Association's a 501c6 and the Justice and Diversity Center is a C3. But every day we are mindful of the services we provide and making sure that we get that right in both organizations. But in addition to that, we are worried about revenue and expenses. So in a for-profit space, that would be sales of services or products and how you spend your money building the back end. Interestingly enough, that's a large part of what I like about the job. And I'm sure we'll talk in a minute about how I became to love business. But that's the day-to-day job, is making sure that the people we're there to serve get served, that we're not turning people away, that we're treating them with respect, and that we help them where we can.
Well, one of the things that I've observed since joining the board of BASF is the extent of our commitment to serving the community. And comparing it to other county bar organizations, I really haven't seen that kind of commitment in other organizations. Maybe it exists, but just not to the extent that I've observed with BASF.
I credit that to many of our past presidents. The Jim Brosnahans of the world, the Ray Marshalls, the Joan Haritanis. They were all committed to being bold and to not just being a trade association, but using our skills and our passion for justice to help the community. So it was, 40 years ago that we started our homeless advocacy project. The Bar Association's been around for 150 years, and if you ask anyone who was around in the 80s and even a little bit before that, they were being bold about dealing with people coming back from war in San Francisco and dealing with veterans issues. So they've always been about justice and fairness and helping those who needed help.
Well, I can tell you, I'll just speak personally, that I love the twin focus on not just trade, the trade association portion of the bar, but also on service. But I can just imagine that as that's evolved, there's probably been ups and downs and some tensions there.
Well, one of the things, and I know you hear about this a lot on the board, that we're really proud of, Charles, is that now our 501c3 is almost equal in revenue to our bar association. And that speaks to the mission and the goals of the organization to invest as much in the community as we invest in the professional growth of our lawyers.
And having observed it now in your position as executive director of both the C3 and the C6 side, what would you say about kind of the importance of that dual focus, right? Not just trade, but also the service part.
Well, for me and many of the lawyers who work for me, it really is wonderful to have jobs where every day you know that you're giving back to the community, especially in times like we are in right now, where there are just so many challenges economically, racially. For us to play a role in giving people a voice and providing them with legal help where it's appropriate, it really feels good to get up and go to work every day. If I were only the executive director of a bar association, would I love my work? Probably, because I love working with lawyers and I've made a lot of great friends in this job, getting to know people through my job. But would it be as fulfilling every day, especially after 12 years? Maybe not. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that our JDC work keeps me inspired and engaged.
And if you don't mind me kind of exploring that a little bit, what do you think it is about the community aspect of JDC work, serving people, particularly in these times? I mean, what is about that is so satisfying to you?
To be perfectly honest, that's the one-off story. Every time we hear a story where someone will tell you they grew up in San Francisco, and I'm speaking to the speaker that was at our gala last week. He was a businessman in the Bayview, and over time fell into hard times, and after living in his apartment for 10 years was at risk of being evicted about 6 months ago. And BT Dang, who works in our homeless advocacy project, represented him, and he stayed housed. There was not a dry eye in the room when he told his story. And that is it's really one story at a time. I don't get excited about the fact that we say we do tenant rep in San Francisco. That means nothing to me. But when we have people tell us that their children stayed housed, they were able to fight their landlord who was doing mass evictions in a building because they could get more rent and they wanted the rent control unit back. Those are the stories that keep us inspired and make us want to continue to partner with the city to address these problems. And we know for a fact, if they didn't have lawyers, they would not have prevailed.
Yolanda, one of the things that I observe about you is that you, even though you and I have never talked about this, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I observe that you're driven to make change, to actually make a difference, right? Not just to administer an organization, but to make sure that there's effectiveness and service and that the needle is moving.
Yes.
Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of what I sense from you. And one of the reasons I sense that is I've observed you kind of spend your nights and evenings really pushing specific initiatives and devoting time to those initiatives year after year. And I'm just wondering, I mean, what is it that motivates you to spend your time this way? And why is this personally meaningful to you?
So on the BASF side, I was the first in my family to graduate from college and didn't have a lot of resources on getting into UCLA. In deciding I wanted to go to law school, there was a gap between my graduating from college and going into law school. But I had to figure it out on my own. And when I got into this position, and even before, just in my other professional settings, it was really important to me to be a mentor and an advisor to people who were just trying to figure it out. And so when we talk about when I will stay up late at night to get things done, or when I will wake up and go to an 8 o'clock, coffee meeting with somebody, those are the reasons that I do that. I've learned a lot in this role. I know a lot of people. I can connect people to other people, which really brings me a lot of personal pleasure to have someone say, I thought I wanted to be an intellectual property lawyer. I have no idea who works in that space. I've read a little bit about it, but I have a lot of questions and I don't know who to talk to. I can point to 10 IP lawyers in an instant and make a phone call and say, will you talk to this young person, help them figure out what they should be taking in law school and how they should begin their networking. And it works. And it's not, I don't want to say it's because of me, but usually when I make a phone call to somebody and say, help this young person, it gets done. And I'm really, really proud of that.
To me, that seems like the best use of influence.
Yeah, I didn't want to use that word, but that's exactly what it is. And I've built that in the 12 years that I've been here. And I would do it for other people. A lot of people call me and say, will you sit down and tell people about your path and your story? And I will make the time to do that.
And I have to imagine as the first person in your family to go to college, first person to go to law school, that you may not have had easy access to people who could help illuminate the path for you personally. And I wonder if any of that personal experience contributes to that desire to help your mentees that way.
Yeah, it definitely did. You mentioned earlier that I come across as a really driven person, and I think that's how I was able to figure it out. If I set a goal, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to meet that goal. And I'm going to put the time and the work in to do that. But I know not everybody's that way. That doesn't mean they're not smart. That doesn't mean that they don't have goals for themselves, and it doesn't mean they don't have everyone's best interest in mind. But not everyone is an overachiever or really that goals driven. So if we or I can give them guidance and again connect them with people who can help them along their path, I'm really happy to do that because I've seen it make a difference. I've seen people get jobs because of it. I've seen people get clerkships because of it. I've seen people change course. And really much of my advice, Charles, is about really sitting down and doing some soul searching and not just going down the path that everybody tells them they should go down, but to really think about what brings you joy, to try to look 5 years down the road and think, if I'm going to be still doing document review in a large law firm, is that what I need to do to get to where I'm trying to go? Yeah. But you have to think about where you're trying to go. This is not a profession, I don't think, where you can just take one day at a time, because you need to prepare for whatever you think you want next.
Yeah, I mean, certainly law, I think, sometimes attracts students because it seems like a defined path.
Yes.
But in my experience, it's only defined to the front door.
Yes.
And then after that, the people who tend to be happy are those who are very thoughtful about their path.
Yeah. And it's hard to be thoughtful. Like when you get out of law school, you pass the bar, you get a job at a big firm with 150 lawyers or wherever you're going to work. It's hard to take the time to sit down and say, okay, what's next for me? What does this look like in 2 years? And that is really what I kind of force people to do in their downtime, is really figure out what about the work brings you joy. Is it writing? Is it researching? Is it analyzing? Is it the fight, which means you might be a good litigator? Is it the detail? So that means you'll make a perfect transactional lawyer, but really figure out about what in the work makes you happy or you feel good about in the course of a day, and start there to figure out where you want to go next, who you want to help. Do you want to help corporations? Do you want to help individuals? Do you want to help children? And
finding that really a person, it takes a lot to gain that perspective oneself.
Yeah.
I think people are really greatly helped by having someone who's been there to kind of share some perspective.
Yeah.
And also strikes me that sometimes people, they get so, their perspective tends to be overly shaped by the environment they happen to be in.
Yes.
So if you're an associate in a large law firm doing a 1-month document review project, you look around and it's hard to see,
what's next. Yeah. I agree. And, I've gotten the feedback that people appreciate looking at their career from that perspective, because I think you're right. Once you become a lawyer, people think the path just happens for them and somebody else is mapping that out. And that's not the case. And I have done a lot of presentations on charting or navigating your own career and your own professional future. Because the other thing that happens is you begin to rely on other people to decide, oh, you're good at this, we're going to put you up for a senior associate position, or okay, we think you should be a junior partner, not because you want to be, but because somebody's coming to you and saying, this is where we're going to place you. I can't tell you the number of people who become partners and non-equity or junior partners in firms, and they hate it. They just hate it. And I believe that's part of the reason there's such a major flight between 7 and 10 years to in-house counsel positions. People are leaving as partners and going in-house. I don't know the scientific reason for it. I can give you anecdotal stories, but it's because people didn't really wake up and say, why am I doing this? Am I happy here? And part of what happens is the pressure to bring in business. Once you get that partner title, even if you're our non-equity partner, the expectation is you're going to bring money into the firm, and that's the rude awakening for a lot of people, and especially people of color who don't have people showing them how to do the business end of it. And it's really unfortunate. I think it's great that they end up in-house, and many of them are very, very happy there, but it means they really didn't think about where they wanted to go or be before that crossroad hit.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if people who make that transition are, in the long term, tend to be really happy with that choice, or whether they felt like they should do that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think many people go into law school thinking I want to be corporate counsel. Yeah.
Very, very few essays say that.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
Well, one thing that was, as part of the diversity summit that Leah Wilson and the California State Bar held last year, one of Leah's focuses was data collection. And, she was nice enough to work with, me and others on, maybe questions to focus on what happens over time. So, this year, there was a census done of our attorneys. There were 90,000 active attorneys who filled out the census, and then I think it was 20 or 30,000 inactive. And with respect to people of color, one observation was, and I don't have this off the top of my head, but was that there was a great influx of people of color in the past few decades into the state bar, but then there tends to be kind of a topping out. And people don't make it to the tops of their profession, whatever it is, whether it's in law firm, in-house, so there's still this gap, and there are different reasons identified for it. But one reason is lack of kind of guidance, mentorship, support. Sort of the things that if you don't have someone who trusts you and you trust them and have enough enough in common that they'll do that for you, that it's very difficult to make it to that next stage.
So I've been studying this a lot, and it's part of what I'm working with our Women's Impact Network to look at more closely. I think the common denominator, whether you're in a firm, whether you go in-house, whether you're in government, to rising to the top is to have some business skills behind you. No matter which department you're in, you have to know how to be efficient. You have to know how to manage people if you're going to rise up to the top. You have to know the concept of income and expenses, whether it's grant income, whether it's city funding income, whether it's legal fees income. And I really believe that if you can be a good lawyer, but understand the profit loss model, understand what it means to run an operation, and that's everything from human resources to technology support, that you stand a better chance of rising to the top. Even if what you really love is the law, if you're the DA or the public defender, you have to know how to run an operation. If you're the general counsel, you have to know how to run an operation. If you are being looked at as an equity partner who's going to sit on the compensation committee, the hiring and retention committee, you have to know the fundamentals of what business needs are. So I think if we can do more training around that and just start to teach people of color and women the basics, getting them comfortable reading financial statements, taking them through the basics, not the legal side of labor and employment law, but the practical side of the day-to-day operation and the impacts there. I think it will go a long way to position people to get comfortable with rising up and to be able to speak the right language, to be considered, to be promoted into some of these key decision-making positions.
And you mentioned that that one of the things that you enjoy about your role is the requirement that the business side of it. For you personally, how did you develop that interest and skill as you were in school or workplace and beyond?
So when I came out of college, I started in insurance, and I was a claims adjuster. And I then escalated over time, and about 5 or 6 years into that, decided, okay, I think I want to go back to law school. So I've always been in the business setting, but most of my hard skills were grown when I worked for Fireman's Fund Insurance in Novato, and I worked in their corporate office, and I was part of their executive team. And I was working there when I graduated from law school, and then they put me, as soon as I passed the bar, which was the same year I graduated, they put me into a litigation position. So I was doing coverage litigation, but in-house for an insurance company. And within a year or two, I was made a regional manager of all of their staff counsel offices. So I managed lawyers in Seattle. Within
a year or two of
graduating from law school. But I had been there for 10 years, and they knew my skills as a business person.
As a claims adjuster?
Yes, I was a claims adjuster, but again, I had become a executive director in one of their departments and oversaw all of their legal spend on a national level. So I had various roles, but they were executive level roles at that point. And it was in the claims department. And it was comfortable to me, having to present to boards of directors, having to reconfigure departments, having to go through reduction in forces and figuring out how we're still going to get the work done. So there's just all sorts of daily business skills that I picked up, and running a department budget and having to defend it to a budget committee. So I knew then that I loved it just because it made me excited to go to work. Did I plan for that coming out of law school? Did I plan for that coming out of college? Absolutely not. I thought I wanted to be a teacher at first. But I knew in the moment that I had kind of found my path. I then...
and did you know that you had found your path, that when you chose to go to law school, and then when you came out, did you know that was your path?
No. I thought I was going to be, I knew I loved coverage work because I was a coverage claims person, right? And I knew that I loved kind of this nerd analytics that goes behind doing coverage work. You're basically analyzing and fighting over contract language all the time. But I never thought, until I had the regional management, or they call them managing attorneys, the regional managing attorney position, I knew that I liked running a business within a business because that's what I did. I had to run and manage my region that then kind of flowed up into the bigger corporation. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the daily decision making. I enjoyed the problem solving. I enjoyed looking for creative solutions, but all the same time, I was guiding people on litigation decisions that we were making case by case in the organization. So if you had asked me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have never said I would run a business, which is again, what I'm doing now. And it was because of the skills that I picked up when I was at Fireman's Fund. I fell into it. To my guidance against other people doing that, I fell into it. And I loved it.
And you were in that executive role for 14 years.
At Fireman's Fund?
Yeah.
I think so.
And then after that, did you move directly to BASF?
So I started, I should say, my own mediation business. And I did that for about 5 years. Part of that included teaching. That's when I started teaching at Golden Gate in Hastings. Part of it was doing diversity training. That was just something I picked up because I learned in my mediation role that there's even bias that comes into play in those scenarios. Even though you are neutral, you can influence how decisions are made and how people react to one another. You can say things that are unintended as a neutral. And I thought that this was important to start to talk about. So I've been a diversity trainer now for probably 15, 20 years. And
you continue to do the work.
And I continue to do that. And then I serendipitously went to a program that BASF had and happened to sit next to the HR director at the time of BASF. And I was not that involved with the Bar Association. I belonged as a member, did some mediating for them, but I was not that involved. And they were telling me that they were hiring a new diversity director. And you should think about it, given your background, so on and so forth. And so I applied, and I came into the Bar Association as their first ever diversity director, whose job it was to pull all of their diversity work together, kind of create a brand for that, which is, the diversity pipeline work that you're familiar with. And within a year became the deputy under the executive director. And then, as you know, 5 years ago, became the interim executive director.
And did you have a role? I understand that there was a rebranding of the C3 side,
the Volunteer Legal Services program. Yeah.
You must have had a hand in formulating that and seeing that through.
Yes. So we had another executive director at the time, and I was the deputy at the time. But it was largely because our programmatic work existed in the Volunteer Legal Services program. We had another C3, which was the foundation. So the money was being raised in one organization and the services were being provided in the other.
Oh, I see.
And there was a disconnect. And so the goal was to make it one C3, and which then became the Justice and Diversity Center. And there was a very intentional effort to make diversity more prominent in the naming and the work. Because again, when I got there, diversity projects were handled by one-off employees. Like, people would say, oh yeah, I'll handle the diversity career fair, give me that. Or I'll handle the law academy program, give me that. So they were spread all over the office. There was no consistency, no tie-in, to kind of bring people from one level to another, to move students amongst various programs. Once that happened, the board, again at the time, decided, okay, diversity is a big part of what we do. We branded it now. People know us for it, and it needs to be a part of our C3 efforts.
And if you don't mind, one of the things you mentioned is that, I said, well, did you know that you wanted to, fill that executive role at Fireman's Fund when you came out of law school? And you said there were different things you were thinking of. Maybe you wanted to be a teacher or do different things, and you wound up doing all of them, really.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Kind of imagining, thinking back to that point of deciding to go to law school, and then when you were in law school and deciding what to do afterwards, how was the experience different from the expectation of law school? And how did you ultimately, kind of find your path?
So, my thoughts in law school and coming out of law school were that I would do legal work for the entity. And there were lots of opportunities for that. There was claims defense work, where you're hired to defend claimants, against our policyholders. And then there's the coverage work, which is slightly different. And then we had a general counsel's office. So there were many opportunities, and I felt that I had built a very good reputation with the organization. I think the other thing that was different for me is I worked full-time while I went to law school. and I was working in this environment, still doing the day-to-day job that I described earlier of running departments. And
you worked full-time throughout law school?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Which worked for me.
That's an easy thing to do, right?
Because you had to be really focused on when you studied and when you got things done. You didn't have a lot of time to kind of just not do what you were supposed to be doing. So it worked for me because I had a schedule that I stuck to. But during that process, I just thought I'd always be a lawyer for them. What I, again, didn't expect is that I would have the opportunity to run a law office, which was, again, more fun for me. I enjoyed litigation. I enjoyed strategy. I enjoyed settlement negotiations. All of those things brought me joy in my work. But running a business and being responsible for other employees, making their experience an enjoyable one, serving our clients, all the things I do now really made me happy and made it something that I wanted to stick with.
And you'd mentioned that you're the first person in your family to go to college. Would you mind describing, where was it that you grew up, and what led you to college, and how did you set yourself up to get there and succeed?
So my parents were in their day, and I was born in the 60s. They were considered upper middle class. My father was a longshoreman, and it was one of those union jobs that paid very well. Mm-hmm. There were 6 kids in our family, and it just happened to be a generation when many of my sisters got married right out of high school, in their early or late teens, early 20s. I, again, became an adult in the 70s, and so it was slightly different, but I just always knew I wanted to go to college. I didn't know how. My parents did not necessarily save for college tuition, but it was something I always talked about, and it was just never even a thought for me.
And why was it important to you?
I don't know. If I had to sit here and answer that, I can't say that I thought, I want great opportunities, I want to be rich. That was not it. It just seemed so natural to me. Maybe part of it was my clique in high school. I went to a predominantly white high school out in Forestville, California, because my parents moved out to the Russian River when I was in high school. And we had a competitive group of friends who always tried to get the highest grade on all of our exams and tests, and we all studied together, and we all really just focused on school and studies. And that was part of the conversation that happened in the group was, where are you going to college? What are you going to do? Most of the people in our group went to college. Majority of the people from my school did not, just because, again, they're out in Forestville, California. And but that's just who I associated with, and that was my view of the world. But it was never about, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor. I hadn't thought that far, but I did know that I wanted to go to college. And
your father had worked in a union job as a longshoreman, which allowed an upper middle class lifestyle. And at some point, your family moves to Forestville in the Russian River, and you wind up going to a predominantly Caucasian school. When that transition happened for you and your family, for you personally, wondering what that was like. I have an image of Forestville, but that's based on what it is today. But what was it like back then, and how did you find that experience?
So it was interesting. My parents, I went to Saramonte High School, which you may have heard of, that was in Daly City. And I went for 1 year. And my parents just didn't think I was getting the education that they thought I should. And they always told me they just saw potential in me. So that's what made them decide to move, is they wanted me in a better school system. They wanted to move to Santa Rosa, but they didn't quite know where they wanted to live. So we had a cabin out in Monte Rio. And we lived there for a year, which put me in the Forestville school. There were 5 black people in the school, and there were probably 800 to 900 students in the school.
So you fit right in.
I fit right in. And I graduated being our senior class president, believe it or not. It was a good mix of students. It was the hippies that were there from the 60s, or children of the hippies. There were a lot of farmers. There were a lot of small business owner families out there. There were cattle farms. There were apple orchard farmers. I mean, it was an interesting group of colleagues. I'm still really good friends with a lot of people I went to school with, but it was different. And I believe that experience makes me as flexible as I am with being comfortable with anybody right now. I like to think I can get along with anybody if they're good people, no matter what your background is, rich, poor, what color, what gender, what sexual orientation. And I think that experience forced me into that.
You really did fit right in then, because to go from I think you said one of 5 or 6 African Americans in a 800-person school to your senior year graduating as class president. I mean, what was that like, and how did you find that path, and what enabled that journey?
So the school, interestingly, had various classes, meaning economic classes, within the school as well. So again, we had a lot of people who didn't have a lot of money and just lived in a really rural part of the town that was really cheap to live in at the time. There was also a part of Santa Rosa, what they called the country club area. That's not where we lived, but that was kind of the upper echelon of Santa Rosa. And for whatever reason, their school district was Forestville. And so you had this interesting mix of people with various backgrounds, all going to the same school. I don't. If you ask me to think about what it was like every day going there, I don't remember there being any issues. There were a couple of instances where I will actually share one story. There was a young man who was Caucasian who I was really good friends with, and I was really good in math at the time. And so I was tutoring him because he needed help. And this was all done by phone, right? And one day his father realized who I was and who he was talking to, like about his math homework and math tutoring, and went to him and said, it's great that you're getting tutored because you need the help, but could you possibly find somebody who's not black and find one of the white kids in your school who can help you with this? And the kid was such a good kid that he ended up sharing the story with me. That's really like the only instance I can think of where things just got uncomfortable or weird. And maybe it was stranger than I remember, but as I look back, I cannot say that it was uncomfortable or an uncomfortable place to be for 3 years. I really enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed going to a small high school. And I credit my ability to engage with anyone now comfortably to that experience. I had to figure out a way to get along with people and fit in.
One of the things that I observe about your work is that you bring a real passion to representing the, I don't know how you put it, but the little guy and the people who are underserved and maybe voiceless. Coming from the, where you did and, you got upper middle class upbringing, it sounds like a pretty reasonable high school. What led you to have that focus and passion?
I think it comes from my parents. My father in particular was always someone who would fight for the underdog. If he ever, for example, saw children in our family, whether it was cousins or whoever, being mistreated or bullied or whatever, he would personally step in and do something about it. And he did not like seeing people disadvantaged or mistreated. I would see him give money to people that he felt were in need. And I also remember when we were growing up, we would have family members who, were trying to go to college and had to move to California. And we had several cousins living with us, again, with 5 kids, over periods of time, because my parents just always wanted to help people who needed help. I really do believe that's where that comes from.
Yolanda, in your work in BASF, you wear a lot of different hats. And I've seen it firsthand. But what would surprise people about the work that you do, and the skills that you have to bring to bear, and what you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? I
would say the biggest challenge, but again, it's something I enjoy, is in the course of any given day, Charles, I might have 10 very important decisions I have to make in any point in time. Somebody comes into my office and says, this just happened, what do we do? Somebody comes in and says, this grant money didn't come in, how are we going to respond to this? How are we going to restructure or reconfigure ourselves to manage that? And I like that. One of the gifts I've been told I have is I can take a lot of information really quickly and within minutes start to strategize a way out or a solution. And I've heard it described as something, and I can't remember the wording, but for somebody to be able to digest and assimilate a lot of information and make it make sense so that you can begin to move forward with it. So I think that's the most surprising part of the job. Like, we've had board members work in our office for a day or whatever, and they will notice just the traffic in and out of my office on any given day. And every one of those is I need some guidance, we need a decision, we have a problem. It's a part of the job that I enjoy, but I know if you're not a person who can take that high level of stimulation on every day, it would burn you out just to have to stop what you're doing, shift to something completely different, because I can be handling an HR issue in the moment in my office, and someone will come in and start talking about, we can't get enough lighting for the gala, and the gala's tomorrow, what are we going to do? So it's, but I like that.
Just hypothetically.
But I enjoy that, but I know not everybody can function that way. And it's exhausting. It can be really exhausting because your mind is going in 20 different directions in an 8-hour period. But I like it.
BASF has, by my recollection, somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 members, and they come to us through different channels, whether through partner law firms or as individual, sign-ups for membership. For an attorney who may not yet be active in our bar, what would you say to them as kind of the best reasons why they should become active?
I have personally witnessed, and I've heard a lot of stories of some of our members, many of our members, who have shared that being a member of this organization changed their practice, grew their practice, changed their direction and professionalism, or their professional direction in very positive ways. But it's a couple of things. One, you will get to know other people that can become part of your network. And I believe that every professional needs a network. I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care if you're a doctor, an engineer, you need a network. Unless you're planning to stay exactly where you are forever and never have to build a book of business or expand, then you need a network. You need to get to know people. I believe we make that easy and we make it comfortable for people. We have a lot of different ways to do that. The other thing that I hear a lot of people say inspires them to join BASF is our connection to the Justice and Diversity Center, and the fact that they are a part of an organization that they can see with evidence is changing our community in the positive. And whether you want to volunteer, not everybody has the time to volunteer, whether you want to give to the organization, and even if you don't do either of those two things, to know you're connected to an organization that's helping to solve the housing problem, the domestic violence problem, the immigration due process violation issues that we're facing, makes people proud.
And really, those are the key issues in the Bay Area and across the country today.
Yeah.
So not an unambitious agenda.
No. And we're one of the few organizations that handles a lot of different components of it. We do the Consumer Project, which economics is closely tied to all of those things that we just described. we're one of the few organizations that can give you full circle services, and that you don't have to go to 5 different organizations to get served. Domestic violence is closely tied to housing issues and the threats that are put against people if they threaten to report somebody for domestic violence, landlords, spouses, what have you. So there's a connectivity there, and I'm again really proud that we are somewhat of a full service organization in that way, and we don't just tackle landlord-tenant issues, and we don't just tackle immigration issues.
Yolanda, one of the intentions of this series is for law students to be able to ask questions that they don't have an opportunity to ask. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if you have any advice that you would like to impart to law students.
I would say try to think about a legal career as more than a means to an end of making a living and being able to feed your family. And really be bold enough to take the time to figure out what your good skills are. And I kind of went through a list a moment ago. It's okay to think about what is it that brings you joy. Think back as far as college. What is it that you enjoyed about college? You may not have been a whole lot, but those things that did bring you joy, why was it? And how do you build that into your professional career? It may not come right away, but if you're mindful of what makes you happy and what doesn't bore you and what brings you excitement, look for jobs that can help you get there. It may not be your main job. Like for me, teaching, I was always an adjunct. I was never a full-time professor, but it brought me joy to be able to do that in my free time. And I think that's another way to keep you healthy professionally.
Yolanda, I observe that you've worn many different hats in your career, including you've been a mediator, teacher, diversity trainer. You've worked in financial services. You've managed big business units. You manage big business units right now.
Yes.
How did you come to find that balance, and why was that right for you?
So I like working with people. I like working in operations, which means you're using people to provide services or products at the end of the day. And I like teaching. That I did know from the time I was a child. I used to, in my spare time, I would play school with myself or my siblings. And my most exciting Christmas presents from my parents were chalkboards and chalk. I know it sounds strange, but I liked teaching. And so to be able to do that at the law school level was really exciting for me. I was really fortunate to be able to have the opportunities to build that into my day job. And I like problem solving. I like helping people resolve disputes. I chalk that up to the fact that I was a middle child and had people arguing all around me as I was growing up. And I'm comfortable in that setting. I don't know if you've ever heard, but for many mediators, they don't like fighting. They don't like arguing. They don't like highly emotional conversation. It doesn't bother me. And I think that that's why I was effective in that role, because I could, again, assimilate a lot of emotional and highly charged conversation, narrow it down to main points for people to focus on the real issues to work toward solution. Again, just another skill set that makes me happy to be in that space to help people fix things. So again, it goes back to do some soul searching to figure out what you're comfortable with and what makes you happy. And it may seem like mundane analysis, but dig deep and figure out what it is that brings you joy. And you can usually find a way to bring that into your work somehow.
Yolanda, if it's okay for me to ask, what makes for a meaningful life?
For me, it's balance. And the fact that I have a job where I can teach people, we can help people, we can solve people's problems. We can give a voice to people who don't have a voice. I can guide and advise people who are trying to become better professionals. That balanced against my family and how much I love and care for my family and my friends, that is what makes for a meaningful life. People often ask me, what do I think my legacy is going to be? And I sum it up by saying, if I feel like I helped one person change their life in a positive way, even just one, and that person becomes a better person for themselves, for their families, that is extremely meaningful to me. And by the same token, if when I'm gone, my nieces, my nephews, my siblings are able to say, she was a giving person, she cared about us, we could go to her with anything and for anything, that would be meaningful to me.
Well, thank you for making an impact, Yolanda.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this and all the great things you do in our community.